Hello students, welcome to my ecology classes. I'm Dr. Arpita De and the topic for today's discussion is ecological succession. Succession is a unidirectional progressive series of changes in the composition of the community which leads to the establishment of stable climax community. So, succession can be defined as a unidirectional progressive process. Why unidirectional? Because from the scratch or from the beginning, it progresses towards climax. It is a series of changes. Why it's a series of change? Because one change is followed by the other and this is how it goes on. The end of succession is marked by climax community. Now what is this climax community? Climax community is that community where everything, all parameters are in harmony with each other. No external or internal force usually replace this community. The temporary stages that are there in succession are known as seral stage. So this is a diagrammatic representation of succession. Succession normally starts on a bare exposed area. This barren area is devoid of any form of life. With time, it progresses towards the climax community. The exposed bare rocks become covered with lichens and mosses. So, lichens and mosses are normally considered to be the primary colonizers. These primary colonizers prepare the ground for later successional species. Then we see the appearance of annual weeds followed by shrubs, then young pine forests, and ultimately we get the climax community. With time, it progresses from nothing or from a bare land containing nothing, no form of life, to a stable, complex climax community. Now let's see the process of succession. Succession starts with nudation. Nudation means what? To make something bare or empty. Nudation is the formation of a bare area which is devoid of life. Several factors like topography, climate, or biotic factors may contribute to the development of this barren area. Nudation is followed by invasion or migration. For a community to grow, you need organisms. So these organisms will invade the barren area. A barren land or a barren piece of area cannot give rise to a climax community until and unless there is any trace of life. So invasion or migration of seeds, spores, or other propagules of plant species reach the barren land. These, after reaching the barren land, what will it do? It will grow and form a community. It will gradually contribute to the formation of the ultimate climax community. This is followed by ecasis. Ecasis is the successful establishment of species in that particular area. If the plant is able to reproduce sexually in that particular area, then we call it complete ecasis. coming to a particular land is not everything. The organism will have to live over there and will have to reproduce to carry forward the lineage. So, in order to increase in number, any organism from microorganisms to higher organisms, every organism needs to multiply. Then comes aggregation. The individuals reproduce and the number of organisms increase and aggregate in that given area. So once the organism is able to reproduce successfully, it will increase in number and will form an aggregate in that particular given area. Once the number of individuals increase, there is high chance that they will fight for the resource. Aggregation of more number of individuals makes way for intra and interspecific competition for resources like water, nutrient, energy, space, etc. So resource is more or less constant. If there are less number of organisms, they will get abundant resource, but as the number of organisms keep on increasing, they all will need resource and there are high chances that resource will soon deplete. Competition is followed by reaction. The mechanism by which the environment gets modified by the influence of the living organism is known as reaction. So what is reaction? The organisms that are staying in that particular environment will modify the environment. This is called reaction. These changes renders the environment unsuitable for the existing community and makes way for another community. So reaction is such a mechanism which will make the area, the site, a bit unsuitable for the existing one. This will do what? This will in a way make the pave way for another community. The final stage after reaction is what? Climax or stabilization. Succession terminates with stabilization of the vegetation and final community is no longer replaced. It is thus said to have reached its climax. Here in climax stage, what happens? All parameters are in harmony with each other. So this is the brief idea about the process of succession. Next will come to the various mechanisms of succession. Succession or the process of succession is explained with the help of three very famous models. The three models to explain the mechanism of succession are facilitation model, inhibition model and tolerance model. So we'll start with facilitation model. In facilitation model, we see the pioneer species or the ones who have colonized very early facilitate the later successional species. Certain pioneer species are ideal for early succession. They colonize the newly exposed site and modify that particular area and make it suitable for the invasion of later successional species. These later successional species will compete with the pioneer and eliminate them. So it's a one-way favor giving process, you can say. The pioneer ones are colonizing in a barren area and it is facilitating the establishment of later successional species. It will modify the land in such a way which will help the later successional species to establish themselves, grow and reproduce. So this is the idea behind facilitation model. Now we'll come to tolerance model. From the very word you can understand that somebody tolerates somebody. The pioneer species will neither facilitate nor inhibit the growth of other species. So in a way it remains neutral. It will not disturb, it will also not favor. Establishment of all species is independent of one another. The pioneer species do not change the environment. Here, competition intolerant species are relatively successful. In early succession, when resource is abundant, so here we see that relatively non-competitive species are successful in the early phase of succession. That means competition intolerant, those who can't tolerate competition, these type of species are successful in the early phase of succession, but when resources abundant, they don't really compete. And when resources abundant, they don't even need to compete. Why will they compete with the other when resources abundant? You only fight when you don't get something ready in hand, or when something is less, you want more. That is the time you fight. If you see plenty, you don't need to fight. Why will you waste your energy in fighting? But with these species, there is one problem. These species soon get eliminated. Once the resource starts depleting due to aggregation, which we had just studied, once the population increases, resource will slowly deplete. This depletion of species will cause the elimination of these competition intolerant species. So this is how we explain the tolerance model, and finally we come to inhibition model. Here the early successional species makes a site less suitable for later successional species. So this is just opposite to that of facilitation model. In facilitation model, what did we see? We saw that the pioneer ones are making way for the later successional species. But in inhibition model, what do we see? The pioneer ones or the early successional species are making the site less suitable for the later successional species. With the advancement of time, the death of these inhibitory species make way for later successional species. So as long as these are living, it is difficult for later successional species to come and establish themselves or colonize in that particular area. But once these species, the early ones, die off, it becomes easier for those late successional species to invade and colonize in that particular area. Next we come to the various types of succession. We will study or will emphasize on these particular types of succession. So let's take up one by one. Let's come to primary succession. Succession commencing in the barren area where no community exists. This is called primary succession. The very word primary indicates what? Something right from the beginning. So the succession is commencing in a barren area where no community existed. Next, coming to secondary succession. This is a bit different from primary succession. The main point of difference is where succession occurring at a site from where an already developed or existing community has been completely or partially destroyed. So initially there was a piece of land where a community existed. Due to some environmental cause or some reason, It has been completely or partially destroyed. After this destruction, succession again commences. So this succession is known as secondary succession. Then we come to autotrophic and heterotrophic succession. In autotrophic succession, from the word autotroph itself, you know that succession where number of plants are more than that of animals. So autotrophic organisms are more, heterotrophic organisms are less. And in heterotrophic succession, this is just the opposite. Succession where number of heterotrophic organisms are more than that of autotrophic organism. So an autotrophic succession is where plants are more, and heterotrophic succession is where animals are more. Next we'll come to autogenic and allogenic succession. From the word auto, you can understand something to do with self. Auto means what? On its own. Auto-driven succession is what? A self-driven one and brought about by interaction between organisms and the environment. If a set of organism is living in a particular environment, they will definitely have some reaction, right? So the interaction between the organism and the environment will definitely have an effect on the succession. So autogenic succession is what? Self-driven, and it is brought about by this interaction between the organism and the environment. Then we come to allogenic succession. Allogenic succession is what? The changes are brought about by external agencies. Here the changes are not brought by the existing community itself. They are brought about by the external agencies. Next we come to progressive succession. Progressive succession and regressive succession are just opposite to one another. That means what? A progressive succession is that succession where we see that succession is taking place from a simpler form to a more complex form. Like for example, a grassland is a very simple community. If that grassland changes to a forest, it is a complex community. So it is progressing from simpler to complex forms. On contrary, retrogressive succession is a succession that takes place from complex form to more simpler forms, like a forest converting into a grassland. A forest is more complex in structure, but a grassland is much more simpler. So when a forest gets converted to a grassland, we call it a retrogressive succession. So this is how we complete the various types of succession. This is how we also come to the end of our lecture. I hope you have liked it. If you have any doubt, any confusion anywhere, please feel free to get back to me in the comment section. If you have liked the lecture, please do subscribe to my channel and share it with your friends. Hope to see you soon, and a big thank you for your kind attention. Goodbye.